There's a long tradition of tracing gender differences in delinquency to traits that are uniquely male or female. The argument that biological and psychological differences between males and females can explain differences in crime rates is not a new one. And again, we talked about these generally under our individual views of delinquency, but we're going to explore them in more detail relative to gender. And early biological explanations, we talked about Dr. Cesar Lombroso in the late 1800s when he began focusing on biological traits present at the time of birth. He's known as in modern criminology, as the father of criminology. And his theory of the born criminal that was dominant in the thinking of what is criminal behavior in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Essentially, he believed that criminality was inherited and that criminals could be identified by their physical defects, like their hawk noses, their teeth, their jawline, bloodshot eyes, etc. However, he did not confine his views to just male criminals. He wrote the book The Female Offender, and concluded, among other things, that female criminals were far more ruthless than male. They tended to be lustful and immodest, were shorter and more wrinkled, and had darker hair and smaller skulls than normal women. He did say that women suffered less baldness, and I will say that he was studying prostitutes. Those were his subjects. And he said women who committed crimes of passion had prominent lower jaws and were more wicked than their male counterparts. He concluded that females who commit crimes appeared closer to men than girls, noting that they had excessive male characteristics, i.e. the masculinity hypothesis. Further early psychological explanations, the physical differences between males and females has been explained by the basis of their behavioral differences. The early psychodynamic views include Freud's penis envy theory and later theorists' assertion that girls are socialized to be passive. According to Freud's penis envy theory, young girls experience anxiety upon realization that they do not have a penis. Freud considered this realization a defining moment in a series of transitions toward a mature female sexuality and gender identity. His theory, the penis envy stage, begins the transition from an attachment to the mother to competition with the mother for the attention, recognition, and affection of the father. The parallel reaction of a boy's realization that women do not have a penis is castration anxiety. Later theorists claim that the low delinquency rate in girls is because they are raised to be passive, but passivity also makes them vulnerable to manipulation by men, as well as more susceptible to engage in sex-related crimes. Those were the earlier biological and psychological views. More contemporary views in attributing gender differences in delinquency is the interaction of biological and psychological traits with the social environment that produces delinquency. And early puberty, one of those traits, girls who reach puberty early are more likely to engage in antisocial behavior and then engage in delinquency. They tend to date boys who are older than them, are likely to engage in sex, and do so under the influence of drugs and alcohol. They may also be more apt to engage in drinking, smoking, and abusing drugs. Along the same lines as who they interact with, physical attractiveness and sociability make girls vulnerable to delinquency because they have greater dating options. They're more likely to hang out with a deviant crowd. They'll begin drinking and using drugs, and this peer experience can enhance risk of engaging in deviant behavior. So one of the traits is early puberty. Early puberty also follows, there's victimization. Boys and girls who reach puberty early are at an increased risk of victimization as well as delinquency. And going back to girls who begin dating earlier, who have older boyfriends, they're more at risk to be sexually assaulted. Boys whose peers are made up of mostly males are more likely to engage in risky behavior to keep up with their friends. Hormonal effects. We talked about this in Chapter 3. Hormonal effects are factors that are associated with or can lead to antisocial behaviors. The hormonal levels in adolescents, adolescents experience more intense mood swings, anxiety, restlessness than adults. That explains the high violence rates among our young teen males. Testosterone has been linked to criminality and violence. Research has shown that exposure to unnaturally high levels of testosterone permanently alters behavior. Girls who were unintentionally exposed to elevated amounts of testosterone during their fetal development displayed a marked long-term tendency toward aggression. On the other hand, boys who were prenatally exposed to steroids that decreased testosterone levels displayed decreased aggressiveness. So this trait amongst the genders can influence delinquency. PMS, premenstrual syndrome, that the onset of women's menstrual cycle triggers excessive amounts of female sex hormones, which stimulates antisocial, aggressive behavior. There have been a handful of cases, criminal cases, where women, I haven't seen it in a juvenile setting because it's so rare. There was a handful of cases nationwide and a few over in England where defendants who were women who committed violent crimes, killed somebody, used this defense saying they were under the influence of PMS. All of those defenses have been unsuccessful. It's hotly contested issue whether this is a trait that should be considered as a factor. But studies of female prisoners have shown that women commit more crimes during premenstrual week than any other time. But there is one attorney who did some research that calculated that at most 0.1% of women are afflicted with PMS commit violent crimes. So it is certainly a very hot issue. Aggression. Gender differences in delinquency rate can be explained by differences in aggression. Some believe that males are more inherently aggressive than females, that this condition appears early on, before socialization, and is related to the difference in evolution between males and females' reproductive systems. Males are more aggressive because they wish to have many sex partners to ensure that there's the chances of having offspring. Females control their aggression because having multiple mates does not increase their chances of conception. Females focus on acquiring things that help in rearing offspring. Some more contemporary views, psychological views, as already indicated. One view is that girls are socialized to be less aggressive than boys. So some psychologists believe that girls who get involved in antisocial behavior are suffering from some form of mental anguish or abnormality. Research shows that girls suffer more psychological damage as a result of living in a dysfunctional home and other life stressors over boys. Gender differences have also been noted in mental health risk factors for delinquency. For example, boys outnumber girls by a ratio of 3-1 in the diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and conduct disorder, which are known risk factors for problem behavior and delinquency in boys. Although girls exhibit lower levels of delinquency associated with these disorders, mental health problems linked to life stressors and experiences of victimization, such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and they are diagnosed at a much higher rate, the girls over boys. Although these disorders are also associated with delinquencies among boys, the relationship appears to be much stronger for girls. And that's when also a dysfunctional home and life stressors exist. It's more, those impact girls more than boys. Female delinquency is also tested higher on a number of psychological tests, including psychopathic deviation, paranoia, and schizophrenia. So in this video, we just examined the traits related to female delinquency and the differences in delinquency between the genders. The next thing we're going to turn to is the explanation between socialization and female delinquency. The next section is going to focus more so on female delinquency than we have already.